Life moves fast and youth never lasts. I didn't intend for that to rhyme initially, but we're just going to go with it. And for Elizabeth Sparkle, the struggle to maintain relevance and self-worth turns into chaos. I'm Micah, a licensed therapist, and here we like to talk about horror and mental health. Body horror as the genre can serve as a metaphorical representation for a lot of the psychological issues that people experience related to self-perception and identity. To me, The Substance is a cautionary tale about balance and acceptance. But first the story, then the therapy. The movie begins with the placement of Elizabeth Sparkle's own star. We watch as the passage of time slowly wears away and erodes at her star, and we see the cracks begin to form. Heavy-handed symbolism, much. Elizabeth Sparkle is doing one of her dance workout episodes of her show, but she is promptly fired on her 50th birthday. So she's already having a shitty day, adjusting to significant unexpected change, and then she gets into a car wreck because the universe took a big dump on her. While in the hospital, she is approached by a young, attractive male nurse, and he gives her a phone number. He picked up on her feeling upset regarding her age after the doctor made some comments. And this number was for The Substance, a super shady company that claims to be able to make a brand new you. She continues this spiral that she's headed down and eventually contacts the company. She's told an address, and in her desperation, she goes to a very shady, seedy place. And she receives the package in an assigned locker. She rushes home, opens up the box, and begins orienting herself to this process. I would have so many questions, so many more questions than what they actually answer, but desperation is a really strong motivator sometimes. So the takeaway of this orientation is primarily that you are one and that you have to maintain the balance. Okay, so the balance is actually that you switch back and forth between the current you and the new you every 7 days. The new you is a separate entity. We'll see how that happens. So daily, you have to inject yourself with a stabilizer that appears to be spinal fluid from the original you. Ugh. The second that you're supposed to inject anything into your body, I'm out. Nope, not happening. But not Elizabeth, because she's super desperate to maintain relevancy. And she believes this isn't going to happen unless she changes completely. So after following the instructions, for the most part, and injecting herself, she falls onto her bathroom floor. And her back starts like bubbling, like someone's trying to break out of there. And it is. And emerging from her spine, like a bug shedding its exoskeleton, is Sue, the younger and allegedly better version of Elizabeth. It seems like that was really unpleasant. But this whole plan begins to work. Sue rises to fame in the spot of Elizabeth, literally. At first, Elizabeth works to maintain the balance, despite the toll that the back and forth transition is having on her mental health. Quickly, Sue becomes the preferable choice for her. One evening, as she's Sue and is entertaining a gentleman, she begins to run out of time for the switchback. She pushes it to the brink by withdrawing additional stabilizer so that she can continue on with her evening. Bad idea. Sometimes rules are there for a reason. When she returns to the body of Elizabeth, she learns the consequences of her choice. One of her fingers has now dramatically aged. She learns this is irreversible when contacting the company, and she's told by them, you can stop this at any time. But any harm caused by the balance not being maintained is irreversible. Here's the second point in which I would be like, okay, well, that's enough. This is where we start to see the extreme duality of Elizabeth and Sue. Elizabeth encounters the guy who gave her the number, but in his true form. A very elderly gentleman who also appears to be struggling with the impact of the situation on his mental health, and talks about some serious themes here of people still deserving to survive and be relevant, even if they're not of a certain age range. You can tell this is an impactful scene that hits her hard. But when she's in Sue's form, her mindset changes. I wonder if that is due in part to the place that she's at developmentally. I mean, Sue is definitely under 25, and in real life, the brain keeps growing up until your mid to late 20s. I theorize that the short-sightedness of a younger brain is part of the reason why this mindset shifts so dramatically when Sue is in charge. Elizabeth's form devolves into a pretty low state and is experiencing a lot of depression and anger at Sue, who, by the way, she gets to see all the time from the billboard she can see from her fancy apartment. She soothes herself by cooking and eating and sitting and watching TV, leaving the depression mess for Sue to deal with upon their exchange. It's kind of like a fuck you. Eventually, Sue is like, well, that's that. I'm not switching. And she literally drains Elizabeth, despite knowing there would be significant consequences. But this is until she can't anymore, because there's no more stabilizer. She calls the company and they tell her, you have to switch back to replenish the stabilizer. Of course, she's not thrilled about this, but without the stabilizer, she experiences some really debilitating symptoms. This is when we see the outcome of her choice not to follow the rules. Elizabeth is terribly disfigured and incredibly aged. At this point, she realizes what she's done and decides to cut her losses. She learns that she can terminate this situation and requests to do so through the company that provides the substance. She injects this substance into Sue, but doesn't inject it all because she stops when she sees Sue's version of her on the billboard from her apartment. She knows that she's going to fade completely into irrelevance without Sue. But then shit gets weirder. Sue wakes up and finds Elizabeth trying to kill her, and she's mad, and there's a big fight. Sue ends up beating Elizabeth to death, which, remember, they are one and the same. She killed the most important component of her existence, the original. I expected this movie to end up with them killing themselves somehow, but it's not that simple of an ending. It keeps going, which I appreciate because the ending gets kind of unhinged. So after killing the older version of herself, Sue returns to the set stage where she is supposed to perform for New Year's Eve, where her teeth start falling out. So she realizes she fucked up and goes to inject more of the substance in herself. And this is substance that she was supposed to discard for a reason. She is begging for a newer, better version of herself to emerge. And a new version does emerge, not exactly what she'd hoped for. A monster form emerges. I did kind of guess that maybe she would wander back on stage, and she does. The monster version is seemingly in denial and delusional, and ends up actually cutting out a picture of Elizabeth's original face and taping it on hers, and trying to squeeze into that dress with all these deformities, including various body parts sticking out and another face that is that of Elizabeth on her that seems to be perpetually screaming. She makes her way back out, wanders onto the stage where she is not met with kindness and compassion. Everyone actually freaks out. Did not expect the boob to plop out of her head. I'm not kidding. It is like a boob that just... I was like, what is going on right now? I also did not expect it to turn into a Gwar concert, but it did. And she's degrading very quickly in every way imaginable. So she flees the stage. The movie ends with the blob mess that is now Elizabeth splatting onto the concrete, where the weird open mouth face of Elizabeth crawls to Elizabeth's star, where she sits and melts into nothing. Next day, cleaning guy just sweeps whatever's left up. Poor Elizabeth. She learned the hardest way imaginable that accepting yourself even as you age is a better route. There are significant risks to going to great lengths to maintain youth, and it's ultimately a futile battle. Elizabeth's identity for years was wrapped up in her appearance, which is unavoidably a temporary asset, but she was stuck in a world of nothing but societal expectations about youth, beauty, and worth. Now for the therapy. Some of the themes I pulled from this include societal obsession with youth, specifically as it pertains to women, more so than men. It happens to men, don't get me wrong, but women feel it harder. And Elizabeth's struggle really parallels the real world beauty standards and that internalized social pressure that we all come to feel. There's also some themes around the character dynamics. I mentioned the duality, the two extremes of the same person. There's fragility and vitality, and then there's a cost of trying to maintain that perfect balance. Like I said, body horror can symbolize some of the psychological struggles that people experience based on their perception of themselves, including body dysmorphia, and a lot of eating disorders and things like that are derived from those psychological issues with our own image. So Elizabeth experienced a crisis of identity and self-worth, clearly. Something that a therapist would assist someone with in this situation would be exploring how they can develop their own intrinsic self-worth and shifting focus from external metrics like beauty or superficial success. Elizabeth's desperation reflects a common fear amongst people. With aging comes some changes and transitions in life that people just don't want to face. It makes sense. We need to challenge some ageist beliefs to shift this mindset away and learn how to embrace the evolving self. Something like cognitive restructuring can help people reframe the process of aging and see it as growth rather than decline. I think that the internal battle that Sue and Elizabeth represent is very interesting to see play out in a literal sense. It's like the battle between who we are and who we think we should be. That's looking at the themes of inner critic versus authentic self. Narrative therapy may be a good thing for that. As I said, body dysmorphia and perfectionism play into this. Body dysmorphia is a disorder where someone doesn't see themselves as they really are, and it's very extreme, and they hyper-focus on very specific perceived flaws on themselves and believe them to be much more severe than they actually are. And this ties in with some perfectionism, which is something that we see in people with certain personality traits. Sometimes we see it in OCD or OCD-like traits. It really is a maladaptive coping mechanism. It comes from trying to cover up deep insecurities, which can come from trauma. The therapist might help someone employ some mindfulness strategies and practice some self-compassion, trying to learn to appreciate your body rather than striving for unattainable ideals. Finally, another theme that I noticed was about dependency and boundaries. Boundaries are like top 5 things that I'm constantly talking to people about. So the balance of the time shared could also represent consequences of dependency and blurred boundaries. Elizabeth's failure to respect this balance highlights how imbalance can lead to chaos. As someone who will soon be considered closer to 40 than 30, I can feel some of the impending pressure of society. Self-acceptance is important. We are all going to die. Many of us will get the chance to age, but not all of us. If you take anything away from this, accept the changes, embrace them, figure out what you need to do to keep yourself healthy and happy. Don't expect anything to stay the same forever at all. It's just not going to happen. I'll leave you with this little therapy nugget. When you start to notice the signs of aging, if you hopefully get that opportunity, reframe your thoughts about it. It's going back to the cognitive restructuring. You get to experience this transition, while so many do not. Well, lean into it. Plus, you get old enough, you can get away with some weird shit, mostly because of ageism and assumptions about age. I'm kind of looking forward to being an old person so that I can just mess with people. Not gonna lie. We'll do that.